Welcome to In This Corner with Cyrus Fees. On this episode, a little bit different. We're used to having, of course, the biggest legends to ever lace up gloves in MMA, professional wrestling, etc. Well, now we are going to do a quick detour here, and we're going to have fun with a couple of very experienced, very popular content creators online on YouTube, podcasts, etc. But we're going to kick things off with this guy. You've seen him on Pat the NES Punk, the official YouTube channel, over 240,000 subscribers, host of the Completely Unnecessary podcast with Ian Ferguson, author of the Ultimate NES and SNES Guidebook, and producer of the Not For Resale video game store documentary that you can find on Amazon and thepunkeffect.com. And, of course, my favorite, The Video Game Years, on Amazon Prime right now. Huge fan. Pat Contri, welcome to In This Corner.
Thanks, Cyrus. You just about covered everything there. Thanks for getting all that in.
Yeah. I try to give good intro. I'm used to saying, like a 12-year veteran of mixed martial arts, and not quite that, but that's okay.
But if we get into it, I've been studying martial arts here and there for a long time. We can talk about that a little bit if it comes up.
Well, there we go. Yeah, we'll definitely get into that. Obviously, the coronavirus, it's a thing, the certain public health crisis, if you will. You already have an at-home job, obviously, doing the videos, doing the podcasts, etc. How has this changed your life in general, or have you just kind of rolled with the punches?
With my business, obviously, if you're self-employed, doing a lot of it from home, doing online content creation, you are shielded off from some of the negative aspects. However, I usually do between 8 and 11, 12 conventions a year.
Yeah.
And so that's hurt a lot. Not just, yes, it's money making opportunities, but it's also a chance to connect with the fans. It's also a chance to do panels, which I enjoy. And it's also a chance to see some of my friends who are also content creators that I don't, they're across the country. I don't get to see them throughout the year. So it's tough with like Norm Caruso, gaming historian. Like, we're like good pals, and now to not see him is like it's like a blow to your psyche, I guess. But I guess I've been rolling with it and focusing more on myself this year. I'm starting up 2 or 3 major projects. 1 or 2 I can probably talk about, 1 I can't. And then I've got into better shape this year. I've got more disciplined. I got my heavy bag installed in the garage. Nice. I did that right before this, actually. Did it like 45 minutes ago. So I've been focusing on mental and physical self-improvement this year. And as much as I can to keep my mind off of not being able to go out to restaurants or not being able to, date regularly, or going to the zoo and whatever else you would do normally and typically in San Diego.
Yeah, everything obviously just turned upside down, to say the absolute least. And, obviously, same here. I'm so happy to be able to do this show and to be able to work from home and do some things, but I'm not able to go ring announce and to go do commentary jobs, et cetera, for MMA, only a few of them. So I totally know what you mean by that. Definitely throws the event aspect, totally out the window for the most part. So, and obviously being in California, things are extremely strict for the most part. How has that been? Obviously, I'm here in Tennessee where it's wide open, thus why we have the highest numbers in the entire nation right now.
Sure.
But things are a lot more strict in California. What's that like?
Well, we were ahead of the curve. We started lockdown by, I want to say it was like the 2nd or 3rd week of March. We're like, okay, this is a serious thing. This is going to be bad. So we got ahead of it, and our numbers per capita were one of the lowest I think in the US for a couple of months. And then unfortunately, the governor decided to open things back up around Memorial Day weekend. Everyone hit the beaches, everyone went to the restaurants, everyone congregated. Then of course, everything went up. And so before this all started, I said to myself, man, if the country is smart, we can get through this and be back to semi-normal by like middle to late summer. If everyone in the country locks down for like 2-3 months and basically shelters in for the most part, we can get through this. And obviously that did not happen. So now we did this halfway approach, which is the worst. Either you let everyone get sick and get through it, or you lock down. We did this halfway in between thing, which was the worst of both, basically. So the way I've dealt with it, I guess here is just sort of rolling with the punches and doing more takeout. I mean, I used to go out to eat like once or twice a week with friends, or obviously romantic life takes a hit. It's hard to date during COVID. But you deal with it, and hopefully we get the vaccine soon, and hopefully everything's good. Then you hear about the mutant strain in England. They basically locked down the country. What was that, today or yesterday? So this is we'll tell our grandkids about this year, how nuts this whole year has been. Yeah.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. 2020 will never, ever be forgotten. You're absolutely right. that being said, let's turn to the sports a little bit. And, I know you're a big wrestling and MMA fan. Obviously I've been a fan of the podcast for a long time. It's kind of my weekly thing, listening to you guys talk about games and whatever else you get into. But I know you try to talk about wrestling. Sometimes your fans they want to hear games. You don't get a chance to talk about it nearly as much as maybe you'd like to, or fighting for that aspect. What was your introduction into mixed martial arts? And who were some of the fighters that you remember that really got you kind of psyched up to really like MMA and UFC?
Well, I didn't really get into UFC until a lot of people did, was the Ultimate Fighter series back. Was that 2008 or so? Like 6? How long ago was that?
A little early, about 2006, I think is what it was. Yeah.
So that's when I first said to myself, because I've been following it very loosely for since its inception. Obviously, I mean, I was 13. What was it? First UFC was 93 or so. So I couldn't watch it. Obviously, I could hear about it. I used to go to the Barnes and Noble or go to the bookstore and get what was the two magazines? There was a martial arts magazine, and there was Karate International Karate magazine.
Yeah, they had I think Black Belt, and there's a few different ones.
Yeah, I think it was Black Belt and Karate I got. And they'd have like Shamrock on the cover with 2 belts over his shoulder. I think I bought that issue. That was probably like early 94 or something.
Yeah.
So I had that. And so I always followed martial arts. I always loved martial art movies. I had the Bloodsport shirt on with Van Damme. So like I grew up watching this stuff. Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. Power Rangers came out in the early 90s. So there was always martial arts sort of in the pop culture. Obviously, ninja movies were big in the 80s. So I was always into it. And then, Bloodsport comes on TV. TBX used to run that all the time.
All the time.
8, 9 years old. And they didn't always censor it out. So I had a VHS dub of it that I remember this when I was like 13, 14 years old. I'd play it back during the summer and try to mimic Van Damme's moves and try to mimic the kicks. And I got a little bit better throughout that summer. We're talking, I was like 13 years old. I bought a leg stretching machine. I think my dad got me as a present from one of the magazines. Probably not safe. Where like you have to like crank it, with like a ratchet wrench.
Sounds horrible.
Yeah, it was. Like nowadays it's just like it's just like used gravity, right? I had like the earliest Wave Masters freestanding, boxing kicking bag before they toughened it up. I ripped it off of it because I kicked it too hard. The one you fill with like water base. So I had that. I remember going to the public library and looking at their martial arts section. There was a lot of like old kung fu books and karate books, but there were some newer ones. They had a Kempo karate book from probably the mid to late 80s. I'm like, that's very interesting.
Sure.
Then they had a Brazilian jiu-jitsu book. I'll never forget that because that was kind of new on the scene in the early 90s. And I don't know who the author was, but I remember getting it. It was like mostly jiu-jitsu, but also judo. And I looked at the throws and things like that. I remember practicing with one of my friends and it actually worked. I did a hip toss and it worked the first time. And I was like, wow, this stuff works. So I was always into martial arts, at least a little bit. And then I always had a natural proclivity, I think, towards things like that. And then in college, I actually said, I'm going to try to do fencing. There was a fencing club. I went to fencing, and people forget that's a martial art. I mean, you can kill people if you know how to fence. Technically,
fair enough.
And fencing teaches you a distance, timing, and also works on your reflexes. And I was a natural at it. And I was beating people that were doing it for years when I was only doing it for like 3-4 months. So I was always into it. I just never, formalized my practice when it came to martial arts. I never took any formal training. I sort of taught myself or had friends teach me. My friend Yoshi has done a few sessions of jiu-jitsu with me, and I'm trying to learn how to do a proper arm bar still. And, so it's been fun. And so in terms of the UFC stuff, I say more the last 10 years I've been watching here and there and keeping up with things. I'm not a diehard, but I'll watch the big fights. I'll watch, whenever John Jones decides to fight every 3 years, I'll watch those fights, So
of course. Well, you and I actually probably got in around the same time, because that was about the time that I got into UFC as well. Cause I'd always been a WWE fan and wrestling. And, it was that time when you started getting the Chuck Liddells versus Tito and then the Ultimate Fighter. And I remember Dan Henderson was the first one that I really, really liked. Cause I saw him knock out Vanderlei Silva after I want to say his right hand or his right arm was broken. It was in Pride, and he knocked him out with the left hand or whatever. And I just thought that was the coolest thing ever, is he knocked him out with his offhand. And I just thought he was the biggest badass. So I just really loved MMA after that point and really started paying attention to it. And the cool thing is about that era is they were kind of like professional wrestlers, because they all had their own outfits and they all had their own songs, and it was very WWE-esque. Right about the time that WWE was kind of losing steam, where it just wasn't as interesting at that time, in that 2006 to probably 2012 era, I would say. who were the guys that you really liked back then that you kind of gravitated towards and thought they were the cool fighters?
In terms of MMA or for WWE?
For MMA, yeah. I
for
know
MMA,
we can sidetrack to WWE all day for sure.
Yeah, like I said, I wasn't like super hardcore into it. Like I knew like Chuck and Tito and people like that. I didn't know every Forrest Forrest. I knew him from the Ultimate Fighter. So Forrest Griffin. So I knew guys here and there. I wasn't watching religiously. I would probably go back online and watch some older stuff if it was on YouTube, maybe from Pride, because Pride sounds like it was nuts when it was going on.
It was, yeah.
And I'm sort of ashamed that I didn't know anything about it, because like Fedor running everything there. And once you find out about him, like, oh my God, this guy's killing everyone. Let's see him get to the UFC. And unfortunately, it happens. It doesn't happen, or happens way too late. Right when they bought out Strikeforce, right? So yeah, it's a shame. But I was always surprised at the development. If you told me even 5-6 years ago that UFC would be on ESPN and a huge deal, I'd tell you would be crazy. I can't believe it's evolved into the mainstream so quickly. Really, it went from the dark ages, which were really like the first, we want to say about 10-12 years, into now it's a mainstream sport, and it's incredible that this has happened.
Yeah, it certainly has. And I mean, is in terms of the fighters now, there's a lot of really exciting fighters out there, like your Adesanyas and, obviously John Jones, Conor McGregor, Poirier, Khabib, who knows if he'll ever fight again. Who are the fighters now that you really like to watch that are pretty interesting?
I mean, Khabib's amazing. And it's a shame that he's retiring. I mean, at his peak. I mean, it's good that he's going out like that. I can't picture him staying retired. I just can't. I think some of the guys have that fight bug in them. That's part of it. And you want to come back and prove yourself. You have that fighting spirit. I always think of Ryu from Street Fighter. It's always the challenge, right? That's what drives you. Not necessarily winning. It's the challenge.
Sure.
Conor is entertaining. I think he runs his mouth too much, and he shouldn't be punching old men in bars and getting into trouble. But obviously he's good for the sport. He's one of the reasons why you see it on ESPN now. Absolutely. He's another one. Adesanya is an interesting fighter. I think I watched his last fight was that a couple months ago.
Yeah, it was. Yeah. I mean, the guy he's untouchable basically. I mean, nobody's really messing with him right now.
Yeah, so he's basically like the new Silva, basically.
Yeah, seriously. Yeah, he really is. I mean, even to the point that he, beat Anderson Silva and kind of grabbed that torch away. So yeah, pretty much.
Yeah, but I mean, Silva's what, 40, 41? How old is he? That was not a surprise, unfortunately.
True, yeah.
And that's what I remember. Oh my God, who was one of Horace Gracie's last fights was against that wrestler and it was sort of a passing of the guard. That was like what, 12, 13, 14 years ago.
Oh God.
Oh man, I wish I knew all the names of these guys.
Yeah, now you're getting I'm not an absolute historian. Oh yeah,
Matt Hughes. When Matt Hughes faced Gracie. That was like, that would have been cool if Gracie was in his prime, but it was like 6, 7, 8 years too late at that point. But it's still nice to see those matchups that happen. Like the dream matchups. Like everyone wants GSP to come back, and everyone wanted him to fight Khabib, because the one thing about Khabib that watching his fights, it's like, wow, can anyone figure this guy out? Can anyone figure out someone that you're so scared of this guy taking you down that you can't even have a good striking game? I mean, that's basically what happens, right? These guys get too scared to even to trade with him or to commit to even striking properly, and so they get taken down and they get mauled. There has to be someone that could figure him out eventually. Everyone gets figured out for the most part eventually, or someone can match it. And it's a shame that we won't get to see that potentially.
Yeah, and honestly, I think Khabib beats GSP most of the time. As good as GSP is, there is that age gap, and I've been around Khabib a lot. Show that I work for, UAE Warriors over in Abu Dhabi, and he shows up at pretty much every event because he has teammates there. And the guy is it's a scary, sort of intimidating, stoic type person. I mean, he's a machine. He can laugh, he can be funny, but for the most part, this guy's all business. And I couldn't imagine being inside of a cage and looking across and seeing him. They're just all business, and it's kind of everybody that comes out of his region in Russia. It's really tough to deal with these guys because you just can't, I don't know how to explain it. They just don't lose for the most part. They just don't.
It's a lifestyle, right? So they're
It is.
training when they're very small. They're taught like no pain. It's like it's a stereotypical. What do you think of like a tough Russian sort of guy, right? So like they grew up with like wrestling bears in the snow, basically. That's why when he was talking all that when Connor was talking all that trash, I'm like, this is the wrong guy to say these things to. This guy is not on that side of it. This guy is just a killer. You don't mess with killers like that. So it was nice to see Connor get his big comeuppance when he even taunted him a little bit. Khabib, he said, "Oh, it's just business." After the second round, when Connor realized, "Oh, I'm in trouble now," like it was like, yeah, that's the wrong guy. There's certain people you do not poke them, and that was the guy you do not do that, obviously.
Yeah, definitely not. Well, I want to talk about something I know you know very well, and you talk about it often. Guys like Jake Paul and Logan Paul, who have inserted themselves into the fighting realm, which is it's crazy. And I guess what KSI, I guess, is another one. I don't know all these guys.
That was the first one. That's what started, was KSI versus Logan Paul. That basically was what touched off this weird content creator influencer martial arts thing, or at least boxing. And I'm like, who's buying these pay-per-views? I guess they have like the teenage fans that bomb and buy the pay-per-views. Like, that's one I can imagine, that they're making money. They're making millions and millions of dollars.
Oh, so
and I'm like, who can I fight to get some money? I'll do it. I'll do it. Octagon or boxing ring. I'll do it. I'm not big enough or have any and I definitely have enemies, but none that we would draw enough to make that sort of cash, I think.
No, it really is, and him being able to throw out a $50 million, fight contract to Conor McGregor is just bananas.
He's got to have investors or backers, and plus they realize we'll make it back. Yeah, but it's nuts. Obviously, I don't know if Conor would take the money just to kill him real quick. I mean, if you thought,
and everybody's trying to get it. Michael Bisping's getting it. Dana White said, "Here's Amanda Nunes. We'll let you fight Amanda Nunes." Who Amanda Nunes would absolutely thrash.
If it was boxing, for sure, like just hands, yes, absolutely,
100%.
Absolutely. Because when you're doing that, that's why I was sort of disappointed in people, especially people like Boss Root, people I love, that were like predicting Conor was going to beat Floyd Mayweather. It's like, you disrespect people that have boxed for their whole lives like that. Like, are you serious like that? Like, I was shocked that there were so many MMA people that thought that Conor not only had a chance, that was probably going to win. And it's different. Like, you can box for a couple years, like these YouTubers. And I don't care if you're in shape. I don't care if you have endurance. It's not the same as someone who was trained their whole life. It's just not. There's so much muscle memory that it's automatic. It's not even close. Like, you see what happened.
Yeah, especially with a guy like Floyd Mayweather. I mean, Floyd Mayweather is one of the most elusive, incredible boxers. No matter what you think about him, that guy he's amazing. The way he can roll off and the shoulder roll and what he does, it's incredible.
He didn't train for Conor McGregor, who's a killer. He didn't even train.
No,
he showed up and did a little thing on that. He didn't have to train.
No.
And then he didn't even respect his power. He's like, all right, you got a couple of shots and there's nothing. I'll just walk. He didn't even, if Mayweather wanted to, he could have downed Conor in 2-3 rounds. If he truly wanted to, it would have been finished. By the fourth round, I'm like, okay, Conor's gassed. This is going to last a few more rounds, and it did. But it wasn't even Mayweather would just like walk through his punches. He wasn't even dodging them after like the third or fourth round. He's like, okay, this is nothing. I've faced Canelo, for God's sake. You think you're going to have something on Canelo Alvarez? It was amazing. That fight was amazing for how weird it was. That fight.
This is very, very, very true. So I got to ask you, video game wise, obviously, which is, your forte, your business, if you will. MMA, I don't think has ever really had a real solid entry when it comes to video games. Like, they've had some pretty good games. Some of the EA stuff's been okay, and some of the THQ stuff, etc. What do you think of some of the MMA games that have come out? Have you had a chance to play them? I know Ian gets on you about not playing modern games. I don't know if you've actually played any of these games.
Ian gets on me. Ian gets on me for everything. I actually played the original on the Dreamcast, the first UFC game.
Oh, wow, that game was something.
2001. What was that? God, was that long ago? They had a game, and that game was like so hard to handle. You like knock the guy out in a second or submitted him within a second. And that's the thing about mixed martial arts, just like in real life, the mechanics of it is so weird I think to translate over into a proper control scheme. It's hard to do a proper wrestling game. Half the wrestling games that come out are like, well, this is hard. It's striking and grappling and ground. So it's like, it's tougher to do an MMA gameplay system than even wrestling, but they're all in the same ballpark because there's striking and there's grappling and things like that. But there's so many more variables that go into mixed martial arts and things that change quickly versus a performance art like pro wrestling, where I can't wrap my mind around it. So my friend Yoshi plays it a lot and says it's getting a lot better. But yeah, I sort of never went through that. What I used to play were more kickboxing and boxing games. There was a game called Budokan on the computer. 2 people listening to this heard of that game, where it was like there was like a taekwondo part, and then there was a bow staff fighting and nunchucks and stuff like that. And then like you play track and field 2. There was a cute little taekwondo mini game and a fencing mini game. But then there was a really good kickboxing game called Best of the Best on Super Nintendo. And it was also called Andre Panza Kickboxing. I think he was a French kickboxer. That was on TurboGrafx and the PC. And that was really nice because it was rotoscope. So they actually recorded people moving, and you built your own fighter's moveset out from about 60 or 64 different punches and kicks that you could do. And it was nice. It was rudimentary, but it kind of represented kickboxing a little bit at the time. And so that was one I always liked. I remember buying it at like Funkoland in the late 90s and loving that game.
Well, what about Fire Pro? I mean, I think we got to talk about that. I've been a big Fire Pro fan for a while now. I didn't play the original games. I didn't get into it really until the PS2 game, the Fire Pro Returns game. But now I love it. And I've always liked the MMA mode of it. I think it's cool. You get a lot of good modders out there and a lot of guys that do the edits and stuff. So you can do a lot of fun stuff with it. What do you think of the Fire Pro games? Obviously you're a huge fan, but what they've done with the MMA mode, and you can do boxing, MMA, you can do a little bit of everything on that game.
Oh, I knew they added the MMA mode in the last one. I know they added a boxing mode. So that's really
well. It's really not. I mean, it's the MMA mode or whatever it is. But I mean, you could do boxing on it. Like you got full edits of every 80s, 70s, 90s boxer that's ever lived. You know, so you can have some fun with it for sure.
Yeah, I discovered that on the Super Nintendo emulators when they translated Super Fire Pro X Premium. That was the last one that came out, where we're gonna somehow have all these real wrestlers from around the world, and then all the edit slots, and then you download the file, and it had everyone from WCW and WF in the late 90s, and it was great. So I did my own creator wrestler there of like Disco Inferno. I love Disco Inferno in WCW, but then I got 6-Man Scramble on the Saturn. So that was the first like more modern console that I got. And then I recreated Disco Inferno because I'm insane. But then I created myself as like a kickboxer in the game and gave myself like a high kick critical sort of finisher thing. But that was the interesting part about Fire Pro that hadn't been done before was the critical endings, which means you could submit someone out of nowhere potentially and put on like a knee bar or an arm bar, and you could end the game in like 30 seconds if you face Ken Shamrock. He could finish you quickly. You know, if you faced what was that kickboxer that won the first Extreme Fighting Championships, Maurice.
Maurice Smith.
If he kicked you in the head, he could knock you out in the first 30 seconds of the game. Like, so it was more semi-realistic in terms of the fight mechanics that Fire Pro brought into the series. Besides the revolutionary, the creator wrestler. I mean, insane. I don't think any game still has come close to that all these years later.
Yeah, and obviously it's not mega detailed. Well, it is detailed, but it isn't to where like you can make a guy that kind of looks like The Rock with his haircut and kind of has the shorts, and it's The Rock, and that's what everybody else looks like. So it's awesome. Such a great game. And if anybody's watching this or listening to this, go get Fire Pro because it is a total game changer, pun intended. That being said, last couple questions I have for you, Pat. I think a lot of people get a certain idea about people that make a living off of YouTube. Now, you've been doing this full time for a while now. It's documented on the podcast. You talk about it. That being said, what's a typical day like for you? And I don't think people really understand how much work goes into being a content creator, how much work you have to put in, how much time you got to dedicate to it. I think a lot of people think it's just some fun thing. You make a few videos, throw it on there, and the millions of dollars come rolling in. There's a lot of work into it.
Millions of dollars. Wow.
No, that's what they think. That's what they think is what I mean.
Yeah, right. The best I ever heard was like you get like even like 1 cent per view, and it's like, wow, I wish I wish you got $1 per 100 views. Really, that'd be great. I think what people don't realize is that it's a lot less glamorous than what it seems. Being that I started when not a lot of people were doing it, even then it wasn't really glamorous. It's just a sort of a goofy thing to do in 2008. We'll just say it was like generation 1 of YouTube, generation 1.5. It's a grind. I can picture like any other sort of job where you have to like build yourself up. You build up your skill, talent, and what you know you're good at, and develop what you know what you can excel at. Then you have to get your equipment, you have to invest and things like that. So it's a slow sort of move up the ranks. I guess if you're like a fighter, it's the same thing, right? You start with the little regional fights, in Alabama, then you end up at the UFC after years and years of grinding. It's that sort of mentality that comes along with it. But there is no typical day for me, but I will say it's like NES Punk videos, for example, the long form videos, you can put 40, 50 hours into those videos, between gameplay, recording, between writing, research, editing, voiceover recording, things like that. It's not like people are like, oh, it's a 3-hour, it's a 20-minute video. It shouldn't take you more than a day to do it. It's like, that's not how it works at all. It's not exactly making the Avengers movies, but it's not like you're just recording like this and uploading it. There's some work to be done. And even you have production, you have things to get done behind the scenes. When I do the podcast, that's the entire Tuesday of the podcast. I go over the topics with Ian, we prep, or for the most part, we record, I edit the video, I upload it, I do the SEO, I have to manage the uploads every day to social media, I have to look at the comments and things like that, make sure it's all right. So it's a whole day. My whole Tuesday is dedicated to the podcast, one whole day. That's all I can work on. But other days I like to work on other projects. I'm a writer on these books, and I'm writing for another project that's coming up in the future. I have to get with my editor on things. I talk to other content creators. I do other business calls, try to get advertisers. So it's weird. It's weird being the middle. I'm like I'm not the low class YouTuber, not the high. I'm like the middle class YouTuber, which is like the hardest thing to be, because in terms of like, well, I have no daytime job, but I'm not making enough money to hire people to help me. I'm still grinding it myself. When I say it's the hardest thing, I mean in terms of like, you're kind of stuck there. You're you're right there making a good living, but you're probably not going to make $1 million. So you have to, you know what I mean? It's like, I can't quit though either. I'm not going back to like a day job anytime soon.
Dude, I could totally identify with you on that, for sure. And, I think a lot of people try to jump on YouTube and they figure, I'll put up a channel, I'll talk about this, I'll talk about that. And even if it's good, I mean, there's so many aspects of YouTube with the algorithm that's ever changing, and, just having your cover photo be the right way, and not having too many words, but having some words, and making sure this looks good, and hitting your hashtags and getting all these tag words. I mean, it is a tough nut to crack. And I think it's a lot of consistency. It's a lot of work and a lot of dedication. I think eventually you can break through, but I think a lot of people give up before they get a chance to break through, because it is such a hard thing to get any traction on. Like, you really have to hit it big, and then you get that momentum.
You either hit the lottery and you get big within like a year, like someone like who I love, Scott the Woz, met him last year at Too Many Games, who he said he grew up watching my stuff, which is like, wow, how old am I? You either hit the lottery, you make it big, or you might be obscure and you have your little following, and that's basically it. I'm sort of happy that my growth has like been stagnant, but so I gain followers and lose them. So I'm like, okay, more people are finding me, so I don't mind like this homeostasis of no growth, as long as people like my podcast and like my YouTube stuff. And I'm putting out books and documentaries and other projects and things like that. I like that I've, sort of carved this niche for myself. It's been enjoyable, and we'll see where it goes. I also have a lot of games sitting on the shelves that who knows that one day I sell some of this stuff laying around,
Yeah, we'll see if you actually sell it. We'll see if it actually happens.
Sure.
But well, I'll tell you what, Pat, thank you so much for the time. And I know this is a little bit different, obviously, having a game-based YouTuber on a fully MMA podcast for the most part. But I thought it was a lot of fun, and I appreciate your time. And make sure, folks, that you check out everything of Pat's, from, like I said, the movie Not for Resale. Check out the books. I got one on my list. I gotta pick one up. Absolutely need the NES guidebook. Need to get that. But check him out on the NES Punk videos, the Completely Unnecessary podcast. A lot of ways to check out Pat online. Pat, thanks for being on the show.
Appreciate it, Cyrus. Thanks for having me on.
Absolutely. That was Pat Contri, folks. Don't go anywhere. We got Conrad Thompson coming up next right here on In This Corner.